Okay, hello. Welcome to our informational meeting about the water and wastewater rate study. We're going to wait for some more people to join. I'm going to wait till about 6:35 and then we'll get started. Thanks for joining us tonight. Okay, we're just going to give people about 1 more minute to join and then we'll get started. All right, I think we are ready to get started. Again, thank you everyone for joining us here tonight. This is our informational meeting regarding our water and wastewater rate study. My name is Jessica Medina. I'll be hosting tonight, and we do have Spanish language interpretation available. I'd like to introduce Mariana Rivarola, one of our translators, who will explain how to access the interpretation. Mariana?
Buenas noches, si ya cenaron, buenas tardes, bienvenidos a todos. Si quieren escuchar esta reunión en español, lo pueden hacer seleccionando un icono que es un globito, ahí pueden elegir el idioma de preferencia, y si están en su celular, hay 3 puntitos en la parte de abajo del celular a la derecha que también pueden acceder al idioma de ahí. Thank you, Jessica.
Okay, thanks, Mariana. And I'd just like to remind everybody, since we are offering the Spanish language interpretation tonight, if you could speak slowly and clearly, that will help our interpreters out a lot. So again, my name is Jessica. I help out with communications and I'm hosting this webinar tonight. We will be doing a short presentation, and then after that, we're going to open it up for questions and comments, and we'll have an opportunity to address any of your questions or concerns. At some public meetings, you may have seen like a timer will be set and that's your time to speak. We'd like to keep it a little more conversational tonight, so we won't be setting a timer, but we do ask that you just keep in mind a 2-minute internal timer as you're speaking, just in the interest of us all getting out of here at a decent hour tonight. And again, we really appreciate you joining us. I know it's not easy to take an hour or two out of your evening, and this is important stuff, so we're happy to be here to talk to you about it. I'd like to introduce Christopher Bolt, our Director of Public Works and Utilities, and he'll introduce you to the rest of the team and get us started. So take it away, Christopher.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jessica.
Thanks.
Pleasure to be here tonight. And just a reminder that we're recording this meeting so we can post it on the website for any friends or family that might like to watch this exciting presentation. And I know, Jessica, you mentioned short presentation. I can't guarantee how short, but we do have 30 slides, so maybe a half hour or so. There's a lot of good things in there that we're hoping to share to help people understand the who, what, why elements of why rates need to change. So it is a lovely evening on this last day of July, so we'll try to get through this quickly, but at the same time go slow enough for our translators to capture what we're saying. Again, we are so happy to be out of the drought for sure. So water is on our minds. And of course, we had more water than we knew what to do with as we entered into 2023. And it's been a journey over the last 6-7 months for us to study the rates, and I will introduce our team now as we share some exciting developments this evening about what we hope to do in the future, sharing our vision here in Petaluma of what we call One Water, where we are enhancing and building out our recycled water program. So first, I'll introduce some of our leadership team members. Dan Herrera is our Deputy Director of Operations, and he is in charge of water and sewer here at our Waterfield office on North McDowell. Chelsea Thompson is off camera this evening. She's actually taking a break from vacation to join us this evening and tune in. She's our Deputy Director of Operations at the Ellis Creek Water Recycling Facility, our Environmental Services Division of Public Works. Gina Benedetti Petnick is our Assistant Director of Public Works and Utilities, works closely with all of us. So you have basically some core members of our leadership team here in Public Works, as well as Alex Handlers, our hero, our consultant, who's done a lot of the heavy lifting on our rate study project over, gosh, it's been many months, Alex, and there's some deep dive that we've done, and we've really tried to leave no stone unturned to make sure that we maintain the financial health and stability of our utilities, but at the same time minimize impacts to our ratepayers. So with that, I will attempt to share my slideshow. Give me a moment here. Gotta change a few things. Bear with me. Settings are a little goofy. Can you see the slides okay? Not yet.
Not yet.
Okay. Phew, there we go. How about now?
Yes.
Oh, great.
Wonderful. Okay. So tonight we're having our informational meeting with all of you, and next Monday is what we call a public hearing that allows us to go through the same information essentially, and council will deliberate and potentially adopt the proposed water rates and sewer rates. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Alex. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher, and nice for folks to join us here tonight. So what I'm going to do is kind of walk through a presentation explaining the rates in the background. On the next slide, it gives a little summary of what the presentation is going to cover. I'm going to try to move through it pretty quickly so we don't take everyone's time. And afterwards, there'll be plenty of opportunities for questions. But Christopher or anyone else on staff, please interrupt me if I'm skimming over something a little too quickly. So I'll talk about the rates, what financial challenges the city's facing, and what the projected rates look like, as well as the city has a couple of programs that it offers for folks, including there's I guess a regional low-income water assistance program, and there's also the city has a very robust water conservation program, which we'll briefly touch on, but we wanted to include those in the presentation so folks watching would be able to access that information. So I'll just move on to the next slide. The background of what we're dealing with is, as many people may or may not know, your water and sewer utilities here in Petaluma are financially self-supporting enterprises. They're not funded by taxes. All the money to fund the operations comes from your water and sewer rates that the customers are paying on a monthly basis. So you have to make sure that those rates are adequate to fund all of your operating costs, your debt service, and all of your capital needs. When we look at the city's overall utility, you've got about 20,000 separate accounts About 90% is residential. And as you can guess, there's a lot of infrastructure that's involved, delivering water to all the customers and then bringing the wastewater back to the treatment plant and treating it to very high regulatory standards. You've got over 270 miles of water pipelines and, you know, approaching 200 miles of sewer pipelines. And for the city, your water supply, almost all of it is imported. You have to buy this water from the Sonoma County Water Agency, is where it comes. And as many agencies in California, you've got a lot of old facilities out there, particularly a lot of old pipelines and storage tanks that were, you know, been operating for a number of years, but they're approaching the end of their life and they're going to need some significant reinvestment to make sure the city can continue to provide safe and reliable service in future years. So on to the next slide. When we kind of did a financial review of the city, I mean, kudos to the city for strong financial management over many years. And what the city's done is try to do, steady, gradual rate increases each year to keep up with the funding needs. The last rate increase was a 5-year rate increase adopted in 2017. And we know that the city didn't quite implement all of those increases on schedule. For example, during COVID, council opted to defer some of those rate increases to provide a little rate relief during the coronavirus pandemic. When we compare your bills to other agencies, your rates are, pretty much right in the middle of the survey. Your water rates are actually a little bit on the lower side compared to most agencies out there. Your sewer rates are right in the middle. And the way you have your rates structured, you give customers a lot of control over their bill. So low use customers benefit and their bills tend to be in the lower middle range compared to other regional agencies. And I'll show you some charts in a minute. The good news is those prior increases have put the city on a stronger financial footing with its water and sewer utilities. However, your city is facing ongoing cost increases, not only cost escalation on the operating side, but also there really are a lot of capital improvement needs that will require the city to continue its historical practice of these steady gradual rate increases is what we're aiming for. The next slide shows should show the findings of a water rate survey.
Bear with me, Alex.
Sure, we'll happy to do so.
Here we go. Thank you.
There we go. Yeah. And this compares, the city's water rates for a typical single family home to, a number of other regional agencies. And you can see you're on the lower end of your water rates. On the next slide, it shows a sewer rate survey. Whoops.
There we go.
And you're right in the middle of the pack for what a typical family home spends in Petaluma. And then the next slide shows a combined rate survey, kind of the overall, how does a typical home compare to other regional agencies? And you're right in the middle of the pack. And on the next slide, one more survey to show you is a low use customer, where, in Petaluma, customers who have lower use pay a little bit less than, many of the other agencies out there. You're kind of in the lower middle range, I'd call it. So moving on to the next slide, what we did for the rate study over a number of months, working in close collaboration with the city, is, develop some 10-year financial projections to really get a good handle of what are the future operating needs, the future capital costs, and future debt service funding needs for each utility. And the goal has been to, once we have that, to really try to phase in the rate increases as slowly and gradually as possible, understanding the city needs more funding, but at the same time, we're trying to really minimize the annual impact on customers because we know nobody likes rate increases. We also developed some water shortage contingency plan rates that we'll briefly highlight in a minute. And the goal of those is to support financial stability during, significant droughts and water shortages. And are basically the key finding is that the city's been doing a good job. Your utilities are in good financial shape right now, but you are facing these financial challenges that will require these ongoing, continued gradual increases to keep the revenues in line with the costs and make sure you can continue to provide safe and reliable service in future years. So moving on to the next slide. What are those financial challenges? Number one are the capital needs of your aging infrastructure. The city over the last year or two has done a very in-depth analysis working with independent engineering consultants to evaluate the infrastructure and develop a capital improvement program to address the deficiencies and make sure you're replacing the old infrastructure on a reasonable schedule to keep the systems in good shape. So coming into this study, there was like an initial capital program. And just so folks know, the city went through that program with a fine-tooth comb and really try to prioritize what's most important and what can be spread over future years to really spread that over as many years as possible. So that's been done, but there really are significant capital needs. On the water side, there's over 50 million needed over the next 5 years. On the wastewater side, 70 million, because there's a wastewater treatment plant that needs some significant investment in addition to the collection system. And kudos to the city. The city has been going after grant funding for as much as possible. And you've been very successful in getting a lot of grant funding to help fund these capital needs. You have grant funding for your advanced metering infrastructure, tertiary wastewater treatment. There's a whole host of other grants that were highlighted in the rate study, and you're seeking more. However, the grant funding is a little bit hard to come by, and you do have significant other capital needs that'll have to be funded by rates and the city's ongoing utility funds that are available. So on the next slide, the next challenge you're facing is wholesale water rates. Sonoma County Water Agency sells the city almost all of its water. So as a customer in Petaluma uses a unit of water, the city has to turn around and buy it from Sonoma County Water Agency at cost. And you are getting these at a wholesale rate, so it's at cost with no markup from Sonoma County Water Agency. However, they are also dealing with a lot of aging infrastructure and are making investments in their own infrastructure to make sure that that water supply is going to be there to serve the city and their other customers in future years. So they just implemented a 9.4% wholesale water rate increase this year, and they're anticipating similar rate increases over the next 5 years. So that chart that was just on the next page, that kind of shows you historically what's happened with the wholesale rates. As those have risen, the city has to turn around and pass along those costs to its customers, and those costs are expected to continue rising in future years. And the other key thing that the city has to keep up with is cost inflation. Just like all of us at home are dealing with increased costs for daily living, same with the city's water and wastewater enterprises. They've increased costs for insurance and energy and chemicals, everything it takes to operate the system. So the city has got to keep up with those inflationary cost increases too. Moving on to the next slide. So as I mentioned, we developed these 10-year financial projections. We're trying to phase in these rates as slowly and gradually as possible. And what we're proposing that's been sent out to all the ratepayers is rate increases that sort of include 3 components. One is the underlying base rate increases that the city's water enterprise needs to fund its cost of service. And those are proposed at 2.5% per year, starting this year, and then each July of the next 4 additional years. Now, those are what the city needs, but in addition to that, the city has a long historical practice of also passing through inflation each year and also passing through the wholesale water rates. So as Sonoma County Water Agency actually raises its rates, if they raise them by 25 cents next year, then the city would pass through that 25 cents to all of its customers. The next table shows a little more detail.
Alex, if I could pause and just check in with our interpreters to see how they're doing. Doing well? Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Alex.
And yeah, I'm trying to talk at a reasonable pace. So interpreters, please interrupt me as well if I'm I'm going too fast. So this slide here shows a schedule of the water rates. And the water rates include two components. There's a fixed charge that's on the top side of the table. And for a single family home, that charge is currently $18.98 per month. And it's proposed to go to $20.03 starting September 1, 2023. And then, gradually escalate in future years as shown. And then on the bottom part of the chart, it shows the water consumption charges. So you pay a fixed charge regardless of what you use. And then you pay a charge based on your actual metered water use each month. And for single family homes, they pay according to 4 tiers. So there's a discount for the first tier, and then the rates, gradually escalate as you use more and more water. And so for example, right now, the tier 1 rate is $4.31. So for the first 400 cubic feet that people use each month, they currently pay $4.31 per unit. And that's going to $4.78 as if the rates are adopted as proposed starting this September, and would gradually increase as shown in future years. And I know most people don't think in terms of 100 cubic feet. Well, 100 cubic feet equals about 748 gallons, almost 750 gallons. So the city's proposed tier 1 rate next year of $4.78, that equates to a rate of about 64 cents per 100 gallons, or a little over 0.6 of 1 cent per gallon. So a little over half a penny per gallon is what the city's selling water at in tier 1. And as people use more, they pay a little bit more in each tier. And the top tier, tier 4, the rate would be going to $7.01 per 100 cubic feet. So that's again per 748 gallons. So that still works out to be a little less than 1 penny per gallon for water delivered to customers based on what they use. And I'll mention in future years, the rates shown are going to be adjusted by these additional pass-throughs for inflation and wholesale water rate increases. But those wholesale water rates and everything else is already captured in the first year's rate. So everything you see for year 1 would be proposed to be implemented as shown. Moving on to the next slide, we wanted to show how this impacts folks, accounting for the rates and these future pass-throughs. So 2.5% may not sound like a lot of rate increase for water rates to be going up, but keep in mind that's in addition to inflation and the wholesale rates, which are rising from Sonoma County Water Agency. So it works out to be more like, an 8% and change increase per year. And the bottom half of the table shows in dollar terms, hey, what does that mean to my bill? So I'll just highlight the middle column. The middle row there is for an average user in Petaluma uses 700 cubic feet of water per month. They currently pay a water bill of $50.59 at that usage level. And that would be going up by about $4.40 per month to $55, assuming the customer continued to use the same amount of water and didn't cut back with any additional conservation. So the city has got a robust conservation program, and we always encourage people, anything you can cut back with your water use, you can reduce the impacts of these proposed increases. So moving on to the next slide, this just shows a graphic of what's happening with the city's expenses, and the red line shows the rates trying to, match the expenses over time. I'm not going to go into any detail on the slide. Let's move on to the next slide, because I wanted to talk a little more about the wastewater rates.
Alex, if I could say one thing about this slide. You notice the yellow bars, the PAYGO capital. What that means is that the city is trying to not issue debt to pay for improvements to the system. We have some failed water lines. We have some water tank rehabilitations and other major capital investments that are fairly expensive. And our goal is, of course, to, just like in your home family budget, to keep up the pace with the revenues to make sure we can cover those. So you see the red line attempts to stay on top of these bars. We did receive some grants. You see these gray boxes, and that just shows that we can get additional projects done because of the good work our staff has done in securing those grant dollars. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you for covering that. That was good information. On the wastewater side, it's a similar story. Again, we developed these 10-year projections working with the city and are trying to really phase in these rate increases as slowly and gradually as possible, understanding you do need these funding needs. And on the sewer side, there's really only two components to the rates because there's no wholesale water. The city does all the wastewater collection and all the treatment. So what's being proposed is base city rate increases of 2% per year, each year over the next 5 years. And in addition to that, starting not this year, but next year, there'd be these additional pass-through rate adjustments for inflation. And the following slide shows kind of what that means. Is this the, whoops, I skipped a page here. Yeah, this shows the city's wastewater proposed rate schedule, excluding the future inflationary rate adjustments that the city implements each year. And similar to water, the sewer charges have two components. There's a fixed monthly charge, and then there are usage charges based on how much you use. For residential customers, the wastewater charge is not based on how much water you use, but it's based on how much water you used during the prior winter wet weather period to make sure that the city's not billing you for any outdoor irrigation. They're only charging you for what's actually going back into the sewer system. And the city also has another nice feature of its rates where if a customer is on vacation or has very low use in a given month, anytime throughout the year, that sets the maximum on what they have to pay. So you either pay based on your winter usage with no outdoor irrigation or your monthly use, whichever is lowest. In terms of the fixed charges, those get paid every month, regardless of what the usage is. And for a single family home, the charge is currently $37.93. Multifamily dwelling units pay a reduced rate of $32.24. And under the proposed rates, the fixed charge would be going up from $37.93 to $39.85, so a little less than $2 per month. And it would continue, gradually increasing in future years. On the bottom of the chart, the wastewater commodity charges or the usage charges, all residential customers pay $8.99 per, again, 100 cubic feet. So a little over a penny per gallon of wastewater discharge. And that would escalate in future years as shown on the table. Moving on to the next slide.
One reason for this, Alex, is that wastewater is difficult to measure from a home. We can measure the water going in with the meter, but the water coming out is not easily measurable.
And you're like most agencies out there with usage rates base their sewer rates off winter water use to really make sure they're not, if someone's watering a lawn in the summer, that's not going to have any impact on the sewer bill. So this slide here, similar to the water rates, shows the wastewater rate impact. So the first year is about a 5% increase, and we're projecting in future years between the underlying 2% base city rate increases plus an estimated inflation pass-through, somewhere in about 4.5% rate increases each year in the subsequent 4 years. And another thing we're mentioning is the rates that are getting adopted would be authorized to be the maximum rates that the city can charge. So if the city miraculously gets, many more millions of dollars of grant funding, or somehow the finances end up looking better, the city can always opt to implement something lower or to defer a rate increase, similar to what you did during COVID when you deferred some of those rate increases. And again, the bottom table here shows what the actual dollar impacts are for various levels of wastewater users. And typical single family home uses 5 units, 500 cubic feet based on their winter water use. So The bill is currently a little less than $83, and it would be going to $87 this September, and increases shown in the future years. But again, the future years are subject to those, annual inflationary rate adjustments. Next slide shows the chart, and similar story. The red line is the revenues, and the goal is to phase in those revenues to stay on top of the expenses. And as Christopher pointed out, you'll notice in some of those early years that the gray bars extend above and beyond the red line. So that means the city is spending more than it's taking in revenues. And part of that is the city is going to be drawing down some of its fund reserves that it has on hand. So that's the first thing they're going to do is, spend down fund reserves. And part of it's also from grant funding. So the city is going to be has already been awarded some of these grants. So that's going to help the city fund some of these projects. And it's possible the city might need, in addition to all of this, to do a little bit of debt financing. We don't know that at this stage, but it's incorporated into our projections just to make sure you have enough funding to accomplish the capital needs that are needed in the system. So what Christopher is highlighting there is some of the stuff that's after 5 years. The city may need some major improvements to its wastewater treatment plant. I want to point out that's not affecting the rates that are being proposed in this rate study. We're just looking at the first 5 years, but we wanted to show folks a longer term view just to make sure people knew what was coming down the pipeline. And there are a lot of significant capital needs that are out there. The treatment plant is approaching, I think, 20 years of life, and a lot of the facilities, they're still in good operational shape, but they're just approaching the end of the useful life. So sometimes in the next 5 to 10 years, there's going to need to be some additional significant investment. But again, that's the future. We're just looking at the first 5 years with this rate study. And then we'll move on to the next slide.
Alex, if I could jump in.
Oh, please.
I want to highlight this purple CIP is capital improvements project. So those are all the construction projects. And you'll notice that we're trying to keep the red line, our revenue, our money coming in above these purple lavender colored boxes so that we can pay for most of the home improvements, so to speak, as we go along. When it comes to big major improvements, such as a plant facility upgrade, which can be 100 million or more, we obviously need to take out a mortgage, and that's where the bonds come in for the blue boxes here in the future. And that's just projected. It's envisioning the need. The plant was constructed and completed in 2009, so it's likely due in 20 years. That's a typical life cycle for some major upgrades. So that's what that represents, but it does not impact the rates today, which really kind of stop at this 5-year point. Correct, Alex?
Correct.
Somewhere in this window here. Thank you.
Thanks. And then this slide, showing the combined impacts. And we're sorry for putting a lot of numbers on these tables, but sometimes that's the only way to really show it. So we're trying to show folks, what will your bills look like if you're a low use customer, a typical use customer in the middle, or kind of a higher user on the bottom part of that chart. And you can see, for example, for a low use customer, the combined water and wastewater bill is currently about $101, and it would go to $107 this upcoming year, and then continue to escalate. And you can see, I won't cover all the numbers on this chart, but when you add all these increases together, and these increases include not just the base increases, but all of projections of what the future adjustments would be for inflation and for future wholesale water rate increases from Sonoma County Water Agency. So we're trying to give folks a snapshot of what the total bill is going to look like over the next 5 years. And that's what this table shows. And when you work it all out, it works out to be, annual increases in about 6 to 6.5% per year, all in for a typical home. We do expect that your rates are going to remain right in the middle range compared to all those other regional agencies that we showed you in that survey. And that's because a lot of agencies are facing similar financial pressures with rising costs of wholesale water, a lot of old infrastructure out there that needs reinvestment. So we think your rates are going to stay right in the middle of the range. Moving on to the next slide. I mentioned earlier, we also are proposing something called water shortage contingency plan rate adjustments. And this is separate from the rates. And what this has to do with is if the city experiences a significant or severe drought or water shortage, often what happens is the city has to mandate folks to cut back their water use, and it could be pretty significant. And as people cut back their water use, the city loses a lot of revenues, and in some cases, even wholesale water supply rates might even go up. So what these rates are designed to do is just support financial stability during a drought. And the financial impact to folks really doesn't, it's really not much for these rates, because if someone has to cut back their use by 10%, it means they're buying less water, even if the rate has to be adjusted a little bit higher. So customers' bills tend to stay the same as long as they're, cutting back their water use in line with the requirements. So we came up with these water shortage contingency plan rate adjustments. What the city develops every 5 years is an urban water management plan. And in that urban water management plan, which UWMP, it's shown on the slide, there's an analysis done for what would need to happen to meet different levels of water shortages, anywhere from a level 1 shortage, which is a 10% voluntary cutback, to a level 6 shortage, which would be a 50% water shortage when people have really got to get their water use down in an emergency. So we're only looking at authorization for these rate adjustments for levels 2 through 6, which would be percentage increases to the rates that would be on top of the regular rates if one of these shortages is in effect and if council opts to implement it. So these are not automatic, these adjustments are entirely at the council's discretion. They're not automatic. But what's important is getting these adjustments adopted pursuant to the required Prop 218 rate increase process, because that would give the city the flexibility to adjust the rates in the future if there's a severe drought, or else the city doesn't have that authorization. So Christopher, I don't know if there's any, I don't know if I explained it too little there.
No, you did a great job. And I think the next slide here shows the amounts and what you're talking about with these levels. So.
Yeah, so the top of the chart here shows these water shortage contingency plan adjustments for water rates. And the bottom part of the chart shows it for the wastewater rates, because when water use goes down, both your water and your wastewater utilities are both impacted. So to give you an example, if I take a level 2 shortage, which means up to 20% cutback or mandated water use reduction in that first column, what would be proposed is a maximum 8% rate adjustment. That would be the maximum that the city could authorize if needed to stabilize finances during a drought. And that would work out to be about 42 cents per 100 cubic feet. Again, that's per 750 gallons that would be added on to customers' water usage charges. And you can see as if there's a drought gets more severe, that people have to cut back, and up to a level 6 drought where you have to cut water use by 50% to avoid an emergency. In that case, the adjustment would also be higher, and in this case the maximum adjustment would be $3.28, and these adjustments would also be adjusted each year to account for the wholesale water rates and inflation. And the bottom chart shows similar adjustments for the city's sewer rates, where but for the sewer rates, the percentage adjustments are a little bit less, since the sewer is less sensitive to the changes in water use, since a lot of folks, their sewer bills are based on their winter water use, which is already low. Then moving on, there's a couple of programs we want, and I will mention all this information we're presenting tonight's been presented at 2 council meetings, but we know not everyone has the time or ability to attend council meetings and raise questions. So that's part of why we're representing some of this information tonight. But this is the key thing we wanted to let folks know about. There is a low-income funding program that's federally funded, designed to help low-income households pay utility bills or pay a past bill. And the goal is to avoid folks getting disconnected for delinquency. So there's a program that's the city has signed on to participate with. It's administered by the North Coast Energy Services, which is located in your county. And there's some information there how folks can access this program online at nces.org. And if you go onto that website, you can click applying for help and select water assistance program. People can apply once every calendar year. And there's also some information on the city's website. But if anyone has difficulty tracking down this information, they can always call the city and find out how to get how they can apply for this low-income discount program. On the next slide, the city also has a very robust water conservation program where they have staff on hand to help folks, consult in home with how you can get your water use down. So to help you minimize your water bills. And the city also provides rebates to customers for changing out grass with turf. There's rebates for high efficiency toilets and clothes washing machines. There's rebates for pools and spa covers that are designed to minimize evaporation. And there's also rebates for laundry to landscape gray water systems. We know a lot of people don't have these, but there are some folks starting to put these in where the water that's the discharge from their laundry can be used to help water their plants and their outdoor grass, whatever. So the city provides all these rebates, and many people have taken up the city on these rebates, but we want to make sure the public is continually kept apprised of these, because there's a lot of good programs that the city has out there to help folks conserve water and save money. And there's some contact information on the bottom of the slide. And again, all this information is on the city's website. And if folks don't know where to go, they can always just call the city's main line and we'll get directed to the water conservation program staff. So that kind of covers everything we wanted to go over in the presentation. There's a few concluding points here, but to summarize, what's being proposed is 2.5% water rate increases each year for 5 years for the base city rate increases, plus a pass-through for Sonoma County Water Agency's wholesale rates and the annual inflationary adjustments. On the wastewater rates, it's 2% base city rate increases, plus the annual inflation pass-through. And what's also being proposed are these water shortage contingency plan rate adjustments to give the city the authorization to charge up to these maximum levels if ever needed. On the next slide.
If I can talk about this, if you'd like.
Sure.
Great. So we did some additional analysis recently. One of the big parts of the rate study is, of course, the construction projects, which I think we have $150 million program. Is that right, Alex? When you totaled it all up, all the capital projects that we have over a 10-year period, is that right?
Yeah, it was somewhere in that range. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very extensive needs. Yeah.
So we took a holistic view and we carefully reviewed the necessity and criticality of all the proposed projects. We wanted to find out if any of those could be deferred in an effort to minimize the need for rate increases. But as it turns out, because we're an old city, one of the oldest in California, and because much of our infrastructure is aging, it turns out that a lot of things are pretty critical. And if we don't address them soon, risks go up and so forth. So this slide here represents and tries to capture some of our thinking here. We actually classified each project as essential, deferrable, like it can wait, with consequences or risks, or even possibly discretionary. We didn't find many that were discretionary. In fact, almost all of them were essential or deferrable with consequences. In other words, if we didn't do it soon, we risk fire protection, we risk water quality, there just are consequences, and we need to be very careful with assessing those risks. So the considerations and findings, there are many here, but bottom line is that the current rate study already includes a refined capital improvement plan that we turned upside down and around. And our goal is not to borrow if we didn't have to, although sometimes borrowing and issuing bonds is beneficial to help stabilize rates, especially if you have a large project like we talked about earlier, and you need to spread that out. It's much like buying a house. Not many people have the cash in the bank to buy the house or to make a major improvement to it. So a mortgage makes sense. It's the same thing in the world of utilities. Most projects have a high degree of criticality, as we said, and they have to be done, even if we have to wait. And the thing about waiting is that costs will go up because of inflation. Deferment has already occurred for a lot of projects, things that should have been done maybe a few years ago, still not done. So kicking that can down the road a little further has consequences. Project costs will increase, as I mentioned a moment ago. The inflation rate in the utility and heavy construction industry is actually much more than the consumer price index, and it has been for many years. So I've seen it 6 to 8%, even approaching 10%, over the last decade plus. So if you can do projects sooner rather than later, you actually get more bang for your buck. Many projects have to synchronize with other city projects. So we know that we want to fix our streets in the community. It would not make sense to pave a new street and then come back and put in the water service lines, the water mains, or the sewer lines. Obviously, we need to do these things in sequence. So if projects were deferred further to replace that aging water line or sewer line, the street project also has to wait. And we actually have street projects we'd love to do now, but we're waiting to actually get the utilities improved first. And the last 2 points is that we risk integrity and operability of the water and sewer system. One of the capital projects is improving the computer control system, and that's a security issue. We don't want hackers to be able to get in and mess around with our water system. So we need to really go state of the art and get high-end secure upgrades to that system. And we want to be proactive and not reactive after problems occur. And another thing is just operational efficiencies. One example would be floating solar, which may be something you've heard about. By doing floating solar, and that's a unique partnership. It's a little different from the utilities, but it's a great example of, if we don't do it, we won't save $500,000 a year in energy costs. So another benefit is the recycled water production. If we invest in our facility, put money in, which is largely grant funded, thankfully, then we get payback with having water during periods of drought for irrigation, agriculture, and other purposes. So, and that also provides revenue for the city because we sell the recycled water, which is otherwise a waste product. It used to be years ago. So it's really been a transformation in the water world. There's a lot in this slide. Thank you for bearing with me as I walked through that. But I wanted to give you a little glimpse of the depth of thought that our team has put into this. Worked closely with Dan Herrera, Chelsea Thompson, and Gina and Alex to really flesh out and leave no stone unturned. Thank you, Alex.
Did you want me to cover this stuff?
You can, sure.
Oh, sure. Okay. So the next steps, everyone should have received in the mail a Proposition 218 rate notice. It's a rate notice that explains what the proposed rates are, and also tells folks how they can participate in the public hearing, or if they want to send in a written protest notice. It's got all the instructions right on there, and it also highlights the low-income discount program and the conservation program. So those were sent out roughly 45 days ago. So everyone should have received them. So the next steps, yeah, there we go. And what I like about the city's notices is that you really went above and beyond kind of what a lot of agencies do, which is the minimum for these legal notices. You sent it not only to the property owners, but also to customers of record, which is, exceeds what the legal needs are. And in there was also a cover sheet that explains, how both in English and Spanish, how folks can access all the information. And on the city's website, there are English and Spanish versions of the notice to make sure that these notices are available for a wider audience. So today's the informational meeting. But what happens next is coming up on August 7th is when the city will be holding a public hearing to consider the proposed rates. And if they're authorized, they'd be authorized up to the maximum levels, meaning the city can always, implement something less in a future year. You just cannot exceed what's adopted. And if the rates are adopted, they would go into effect starting the first year, September 1 of this year, and then future years on July 1, which is at the beginning of the city's fiscal year and in line with the city's historical date of when rates are increased. So to summarize, the city has historically done a good job of these kind of gradual annual rate increases. You're facing a lot of financial challenges, whether it's capital needs or wholesale water rates. And the goal really from this study, we know nobody likes rate increases, but you got to fund your cost of service. So the goal is really to try to do this in the steady, gradual increases to try to, again, minimize the impact on ratepayers, understanding that you do need some rate increases. So unfortunately, folks will have to pay a little bit more in future years to fund the cost of service. And I'll turn it back over to you, Christopher.
Thank you so much. Great job, Alex. Appreciate your help and support with all of this. And with that, we'll turn it over to you, Jessica. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Alex. Thanks, Christopher. So now we're going to open it up to the Q&A portion of our meeting tonight. So if anybody has questions or concerns or comments, anything you'd like to share, we'd encourage you to raise your hand virtually right now and we'll call on you. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands yet. Give it maybe a minute or two. Oh, let's see. Nicola Fry, I'm going to allow you to speak. Okay, Nicola, you should be able to speak now.
Hi there. I am a senior who lives in a mobile home park in Petaluma, and we are concerned that, first of all, we did not get those rate notices that you just showed because our funds are, our water bills and sewer bills are passed through on our space rent like they are on apartments and condos and all that sort of stuff. So none of us have gotten any of that information. We're also concerned about the fact that the rate increase in fact affects low income, especially seniors and low income families at a greater proportion than it affects those who have higher rate, who have higher incomes. In fact, the total monthly for the first year would in fact affect me at 1% of my income, which is a little scary when you're looking at a 1% all of a sudden cut out of your income for a year. And then the other thing is yes, I looked for the applying for the Low Income Rate Reduction Act or whatever it is. I got the application. It's 9 pages long, and it asks for my social security number, a copy of my driver's license, and it's going to somebody I have no idea who that is. And I'm disinclined to do it, as well as a lot of other seniors where I live are disinclined to do it because it's just asking for way too much. We are very concerned about how this rate increase for both sewer and water is going to adversely affect us.
Okay, thank you, Nicola. Christopher, Alex, would you like to speak to that?
Alex, can you handle protocol? Do you know, we might have to research this a little bit, but thoughts on, what to do in communities like the manufactured home communities where it's a common owner and it's passed through? Thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And sometimes it's hard because under the law, you're supposed to mail these notices to the property owner of record based on the tax roll. But the city also sent notices out to all the bill payer of record. And sometimes when you have a multifamily building, or if you have a mobile home park, they don't always pass that along to all the folks there. So that may have been what happened. I don't know. And you're right. No one likes rate increases, and it's the folks who on fixed incomes who can least afford these increases. So even though the rate increases you try to make them small and as gradual as possible, I mean, every dollar increase is a dollar less that someone has for other needs. So, you know, again, these rates, they're trying to just fund the cost of service. Every dollar under the Constitution, every dollar that's paid is used for water or wastewater service. But there was no changes to the rate structure this time. I know the city's modified its rate structure in the past, so it's just kind of a percentage across the board rate increase. So if you're a high user, you should be paying a much bigger dollar increase than if you're a low user. But I don't know what the situation is. So it doesn't surprise me to hear that, you know, that they didn't share the notice with folks, which is too bad, because the city did make extra efforts to try to make sure folks were informed.
Yeah. And for most utilities, I'll just add that not raising the rates is not an option. It can lead to a decline in the condition of the water system, which impacts public health and safety, of course. We do try to be very judicious and pragmatic with all investments. Very impressed with the depth of thought that our team has in considering projects and minimizing operational costs. So we tried to convey that through the presentation as well, that we really did leave no stone unturned, and we're trying very hard to minimize the amount of rate increases needed for all of our residents here in the community. So we hear you, and thank you for sharing the thoughts. And I don't know, team, if you have more to add, or Alex, did you have another thought?
I did, because you did mention about you actually contacted the low-income program. I called them myself. Maybe it was a couple months back, just to find out. And I didn't go through the application process. I don't live in Petaluma. I'm a little bit further south of you guys. But I didn't know it was such an involved application that's asking for confidential information. I do know there have been some other people that have gotten some substantial financial help through the program. And I would just recommend you call them and speak with their staff. And if they're not willing to budge, maybe there's someone at the city who you can work with to kind of put some pressure on them, because I don't see why they would need your social security number, for example, things like that. And I can understand to be reluctant to give away that information. So hopefully there's a way of making this work, because the program has been beneficial for folks who have been able to tap into it.
Nicola, what neighborhood did you say you lived in, if you don't mind sharing? Perhaps we can try to get some notices out here in short order.
I don't mind. I live in the Petaluma Estates. But there are 900 mobile home houses in Petaluma, and none of us received those notices. Several people have required or requested the information to apply for the discount. And at this point, we're really uncomfortable giving out all of our personal information. We haven't had to do that for PG&E. We haven't had to do that for the garbage company. We don't have to do that for the cable and network things. Why do we have to do that to get a discount from our own city's water and sewer?
Those are good questions. We'll look into that for you. Jessica, I don't know, Nicola, do you have our information to reach out to us?
Yeah. I go to most of the city council meetings, and I send a lot of things into the city council. I'm also on the senior advisory committee for the city of Petaluma.
Oh, great.
And so I have a lot of contact with the city regarding issues that affect seniors in particular.
Great. Thank
Great.
you.
And Nicola, I'll just give you my email address as well. If you'd like to reach out to me, we can maybe work together. And I'd love to get your insight on the best ways to engage with people in Petaluma Estates. And if you have thoughts on the other communities as well, that would be great.
Okay.
So if you're interested, my email is jmedina. You see my last name spelt there, Medina, jmedina@cityofpetaluma.org.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for sharing and thanks for being here tonight. Okay. Is there anybody else in the audience who has a question or concern that you'd like to share or feedback on the presentation? If so, please raise your virtual hand and we will call on you. Okay, I don't see any other hands raised. Alex or Christopher, do you have anything you'd like to go over or add? And maybe we can wait a minute and see if anybody's
Sure.
inspired to ask us anything.
Well, they could certainly email questions to us. You gave your email, Jessica, but Public Works at cityofpetaluma.org
Oh, yeah.
also works.
Mm-hmm.
So just
And
Public Works. Go
I
ahead.
see you do have one hand raised. So Ben Peters, I'm going to allow you to speak. Hold on. You should be able to speak now if you unmute yourself.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Good night. I did email in a couple questions more about how recycled water rates are set. I wonder if you could cover any of that now?
Sure can. Yes, I'll give you a high level overview. We do have your questions, so thank you, Ben, and we're working on some answers for you. So thank you for posing those questions. They're all valid and important. So currently, our water rate for recycled water users is set at up to 50% of the potable rate. So that's about $1,045, I believe, per acre foot that we charge for recycled water users. We do have some grandfathered contracts. Not too long ago, the city had a mandate it could not discharge in the summer months, and so we had to give away the water or even pay agricultural users to take it because we could not, by regulatory requirements, put it in Petaluma River. That's all changed dramatically, obviously, and now it's a valuable commodity. We saw that clearly in the last drought. So because of these older agreements, sometimes we needed an easement for a pump station or a line, so that's a lower water rate. Our average right now is hovering around, I believe, $400 to $450 per acre foot overall. That's the average, and that's skewed by some of those older grandfathered agreements, those people who took the water when we needed someone to take it. So where we're going in the future, though, towards the one water vision, where all water might someday, if we dream for a moment, be recycled and reused, even for potable reuse. This is actually happening in pretty cutting edge areas of the world. One thing I love about Petaluma is we think global and we act local. So we're all about that and exploring it. We're undertaking an integrated water master plan effort, IWMP. We're going to be giving a presentation to council this fall about the integrated water master plan. But what that is a holistic look at all things water, stormwater, sewers, water distribution, what happens to the water after we recycle it, where should it go, who should get recycled water, who shouldn't, all that stuff. Part of that is a rate study. So what this rate study includes is a provision that allows council to charge up to 100% of the potable rate, which is $2,100 roughly per acre foot. Now, as you heard earlier, rates don't have to be at the maximum. So we can do some structuring and other things, some tiering, like maybe incentives for certain types of uses. If council so chooses, that'll be part of that rate study that we're talking about. And that's going to involve community input, meetings, and so forth. Chelsea Thompson is, as a Deputy Director of Environmental Services, is very involved with this, and you'll be hearing a lot more about this. So I hope that helps to answer your questions. Recycled water in the future. By the way, people often wonder, do we subsidize recycled water users? And the question is, maybe today, or maybe we had to in the past, but We've been so fortunate in getting grant funds. I think right now we have about $30 million in grant funds to invest in recycled water infrastructure. As a result, it's largely grant funded, and roughly it's more than half of the infrastructure projects, generally speaking, have funding available. So it's a complicated scenario, but that average of $400 an acre foot is going to rise as new users come online, as the system is expanded. They'll be paying the new rates, and as those old agreements expire, we'll be renegotiating the rates. So I hope that makes sense, and I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, I had just one other question, and this was, I guess, a little bit to piggyback on the first question, but did part of the rate study look at putting more of the rate increase on the tier 3 and 4 users? As the previous caller mentioned, those water rates are passed through, so that at least the low income rate won't apply unless there's a low income multifamily rate. And I don't know if I saw that in the rate study or if that's a requirement to have that low income multifamily rate specified. Otherwise, you may not be able to give those people a discount. And so if we do want to provide the discount and maintain our revenues, could we evaluate a higher rate increase on the higher water users? Thanks.
Alex, do you want to take a stab at that?
Sure. And in fact, the city already does that. A lot of agencies in California just have a uniform rate for all water use, but the city has established tiered rates. You now have, I think it's is it 4 tiered rates? I'm trying to look at the rate schedule here. Yeah, 4 different tiered rates. And those rates have been widened over time. So exactly what you're saying, the city has done historically. For this rate study, there's not a change in the rate structure, so that wasn't being explored at this time. However, I want to point out that the city's rates, there's legal requirements, so you can't just charge higher rates for higher levels of use. There has to be a reasonable cost basis for doing that. So the city has kind of gone through, and we reviewed the cost analysis again as part of this rate study and found that the city's rates were right in line with the cost of service. So you don't have the policy discretion to make your rates as steep as you want. Agencies used to have that policy discretion, but there's been some legal cases in California in recent years where the state Supreme Court said, and some appellate courts have said, no, there has to be a cost basis for the rates. So it's not a policy choice. However, the city does have tiered rates, and I'll point out that high users, not only do they pay higher rates for higher levels of use, they're also buying a lot more units of water. So it's kind of like a catch-22 where nobody wants to pay more, but certainly the way your rates are currently set up, it is to the benefit of low users. And that's why we included that low user survey there. A lot of agencies have mixes of fixed and volumetric rates. And again, some have uniform rates, some have tiered rates, but when you put it all together, the way Petaluma's rates are set up already is giving a significant benefit to low users. So, even though your rates combined water sewer bill might be right in the middle of the pack, when you look at a low user, they're kind of at the lower middle range, maybe, somewhere in the first quartile around of how you compare to other agencies. And the other thing, sorry for rambling on, is many agencies also have fixed sewer rates. Every customer has got to pay the same regardless of what they use. And you're one of the agencies that has a usage-based rate component, again, to the benefit of folks who use less. So it's not so easy to just jack up the rates on the high users, but you're kind of already doing that within the cost of service limitations that are allowed in the California Constitution. Sorry for long-winded answer.
Thanks, Alex. Ben, do you have any other additional questions?
Nope. Thanks. Have a good night.
Okay, thank you. All right. Anybody else? Questions, concerns, comments?
Just like to thank everybody. I know we had a small crowd, but this is also for the recording to be placed on the website to be of use and value to the community as they're considering and trying to learn more about this. So thank you very much for joining us this evening. And I don't know, Alex, if you had any concluding remarks or if any of our team members do. Jessica?
Well, from me, just thank you to everybody who took the time to be here tonight, or if you're watching the recording, who took the time to watch the whole recording. We know it is a time investment and we really appreciate it. You know, as we said, this is important stuff and it's impacting our community. So we want to do our best to show up and make ourselves available to answer your questions, arm you with all the information you need, and just be very transparent. So very appreciative of you taking part in the process. And I think that's it for me.
Thank you. And Gina, I see you came on camera. Perhaps you're chomping at the bit to say something. Oh,
You're muted, Tina.
I wasn't chopping at the bit.
okay. Very good. Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. And have a lovely evening.
Thank you all.
Thanks,
Good night.
folks. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.